Hi, my name is Ken Basco, and welcome to my presentation on print disability resources for personal computing. As I just said, my name is Ken. I work in digital environments for the most part, so whether it's IT, whether it's social media, whether it's education, a lot of my work involves how people and technology come together and make sense of things, and make sense of knowledge, make sense of information. Typically, I'm working with digital materials, so things like documents, websites, web pages, and even personal computing, which is something that I wanted to talk about with you all today. Now, we all read things on our phones, we read things on our computers. A lot of these demonstrations on how to adjust things so they're accommodating for students with print disabilities is more so for the layperson. So these are just some tools and tricks that are just to get your feet wet into that world as opposed to long-term solutions. Now you're probably wondering, what is a print disability? A print disability is when a barrier involves being unable or having difficulty getting information from a printed material, such as a book or a piece of paper. Print disabilities include visual disabilities, physical disabilities, and learning disabilities. For visual disabilities, these can be things like a convergence insufficiency, it could be being on the blind or low vision spectrum, it could be glaucoma, where things might seem blurry, or you'll perceive the shapes and lights of words and text differently. So anything that demands you to rely on your eyes to intake content, that is a visual disability. A physical disability is when someone might have low stamina or different dexterity, where they are required to carry a book, flip the pages of the book, or they need to navigate the pages for the content using their hand. A learning disability involves how you process the information. So if you intake the information, you may be able to perceive it with your eyes, and you might be able to navigate it with your hands, but the way you intake that information into your mind, the way you process it, the way you retain it, the way you retrieve it is different. Now, you are probably thinking, oh, why don't I just put my materials online? Why don't I just upload them? After all, we are at an online conference, and this is about online learning. Well, not quite. So although your materials are digitized, and because a student can gather all those materials and have it compiled onto their laptop or read it off of their phone, it does get over some physical barriers. But sometimes you have to also think about, how does a student navigate through that text? Are they scrolling? Are they panning things over? Are they pinching and zooming in? Another argument is, because it's online, a student can engage with it in multiple modalities. But that also leaves another challenge. How do you make these materials readable by a computer? That way a computer can read it out loud, or how can you adjust these materials? So today we're not going to be thinking about how we can make these materials readable by a computer, but we're going to think about adjusting them and making slight changes. That way anyone like me or you can do these things and address these barriers immediately, without the need of any specialized tools or specialized knowledge. A prerequisite for doing some of these demonstrations with me today is your text or your materials, whatever you're trying to read, must be selectable by a cursor. So if you're on your phone, if you could press on top of the word and maybe like a highlight pops up, then that means it is selectable by a cursor. If you can click and drag upon a page, maybe on desktop or your laptop, that also means it is selectable. The text also needs to be searchable or findable. So if you do Control F, or if you search your document or search your material and you type in the word that is in front of you, the computer should highlight it and recognize, oh, you're trying to search for smartphone, or the word smartphone, and you're looking at an article about smartphones. It will highlight every appearance of the word smartphone. So photocopies of a material, scan copies, something you put in a scanner in order to visually represent it as an image, that will not work. That won't work with the demonstrations we're working with today. To do the remediation so it does, that's a process called OCR, but don't worry about that. Once again, this is just a demonstration to get your feet wet into that specialized knowledge. I would also like to emphasize again, photocopies will not work, so if you take a picture of a book, that will not work. as well as embed copies of PDFs will not work in this demonstration. So say you're on a course website or you're sharing your screen and you're navigating things and you start to realize nowadays we get a lot of content at once. Your screen displays so many things, but at the same time in displaying those things, everything is so proportionally small. There's so many links, there's too many texts that you see at the same time. And for me, because I get very overwhelmed and I want to focus on what I'm looking at a time, what I'll do on my Windows machine, I'll go to Settings, I'll click on Ease of Access, and underneath Ease of Access, there should be a tab that says Display. And once I go to Display, it gives me a couple options, some drop-downs. One of these drop-downs is change the size of text, apps, and other items. So I'll click on that. Originally it said 100%, and I'll click on 150%. That way, things like links or text or buttons are way larger, and if someone's looking at my screen and they say, oh, can you click on this button or can you click on this link, I won't get overwhelmed by this ocean of negative space. And as you can see, this is a side-by-side comparison. On the image on the left, there's more white space and there's a lot more links. You can see more things at once. But on the right, you may see less things at once, but whatever I have to pay attention to, like what I have to click on in my modules, that is more noticeable, at least to me. And you can try this out right now on your computer. So if you have a Windows machine, you can go to Settings, Ease of Access, go to the Display tab, and click on Change the Size of Apps and Text. And there's also a slider as well as a drop-down to manipulate how large things appear on your screen. If you are on Mac, the way to do so is go to System Settings, click on the accessibility icon, which is a blue circle with a man inside of it, Display, Text, Text Size, and then you could change the slider or you could click on whatever size that you need. On iPhone, on your mobile device, if you go to the settings, go to accessibility as well, and under display and text size, you can click on large text, and there will also be a slider that you can preview how large your text is going to be. For Android, I actually don't have screenshots because I don't own an Android phone at the moment. If you go to settings, go to display, click on advanced, as well as font size, a similar slider will appear. Feel free to pause this screen or pause this time in this video that you're viewing it, or go back to the previous slides or the previous time where those slides display the instructions for your respective device that you want to try this activity on. So we just saw how we can manipulate the text size as well as the layout, but what about color? So if you're in the Windows settings and you go to ease of access, you could actually click on color filters to be on. That way you can select what type of filter you want so that certain types of color gets displayed at higher intensities than others. Something similar to that is color contrast, where if you go outside and you're at ease of access, if you click on the high contrast tab, then you could have this theme on your computer where you might have lighter text on top of a dark background. That way the contrast and the words stand out to you. Also, buttons as well as contextual things as to what tab you're in, that might be a different color, just so you have some awareness of what you're doing on your computer. And just so you know, these color filter settings and any type of settings that I'm going over now as well as in the next few minutes, they do exist on different operating systems. They're just organized differently. So in iOS, you have to go to settings, display and text size, and then color filters, and then you have to switch that on. And then if you scroll down, there will be other color filtered settings. This is the same way with operating to operating system. Maybe they group their text size and their color settings together. Maybe they separate the high contrast. Maybe there's more availability or more options and more filters. And some operating systems can just do more things in terms of accessibility. So the next thing I'm going to show you is actually something that you could only do for a desktop. It's not as intuitive for a mobile phone. Here we go, and it's called Open Dyslexic Font. Open Dyslexic Font is a free open source font for people with dyslexia. Now, people have described their dyslexia to me as when they read words, they might mistake the ordering of the letters in that word, or maybe words and letters will jump around in their mind. Open Dyslexic Font is accommodating because the letters are weighted and it kind of grounds a person's attention as well as their processing and to differentiate what letter is which. So P, if you swap the letter P around, it might look like a Q, and if you swap the letter B around, it might look like a D. Open Dyslexic Font gets around this by weighting different parts of the letter. People have also described to me that Open Dyslexic Font helps because it's a little bit larger and spaced out, which helps people process the information more. And you could download this font at opendyslexic.org. Now, I mentioned before you would have to download and install the font on your computer. Of course, that process is always different from operating to operating system, but in terms of how you'll use it, typically I recommend students put their readings into a Word document, and that way they can select everything in that document and change the font as you would when you're manipulating text in Word. So maybe you want to change the font from Times New Roman to a sans font like Arial. In terms of Open Dyslexic, you would change that font from Times New Roman to Open Dyslexic. That way you could do your readings. However, if you want to do some online web reading, if you have Chrome, there are Chrome extensions to turn your web pages into text that is in Open Dyslexic. As you can see, I'm on the Wikipedia page for Capybara. I have just changed it to the weighted typeface of Open Dyslexic. Just a review of things we went over. We looked at changing the size and layout on your screen, as well as changing the display colors, as well as changing the screen into high contrast mode. We also looked at the existence of the Open Dyslexic font, a dyslexic-friendly font for individuals. If you'd like to ask me more questions about how to address students with print disabilities, how to remediate your texts and course materials, or other options such as using OCR, you can email me at kpb82@echo.rutgers.edu. I also have a student email at kpb82@scarletmail.rutgers.edu. I'm also at Ken Basco on Twitter. Have a happy RU Online Con, and thank you for watching my presentation.